The last dawn of Mohenjo-Daro. The sky over Mohenjo-Daro was painted in hues of orange and gold as the first light of dawn kissed the rooftops. The city was waking, merchants setting up their stalls, potters stoking their kilns, and children racing through the dusty streets. For Anaya, today felt different. There was something in the air, a silence beneath the morning bustle, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Her father, the merchant, stood by the entrance of their house, his brow furrowed. Ships from distant lands had stopped arriving. The river, once the lifeblood of their trade, had begun to shift, its waters receding. The wells that had always been full were now running low. "Something is changing, Anaya," he said softly. The signs of decline. The people of Mohenjo-Daro did not know it, but their great civilization was nearing its end. For centuries their cities had flourished, their trade reaching distant lands like Mesopotamia. But now the streets were emptier. Houses once occupied by proud merchants and skilled artisans were abandoned. The rivers were shifting, changing their course. Some say the mighty Sarasvati River, one of the sources of their civilization, began to dry up, forcing people to leave in search of fertile land. Others whispered of invaders from the north, tall and unfamiliar, speaking a language that did not belong to the Indus people. But there was no war, no grand battle, only an eerie, creeping silence. The temple at dusk. As the sun set, Anaya followed her mother to the great bath, where people gathered to purify themselves in the sacred waters. The elders spoke of the gods, praying for the rivers to return, for the city to thrive once more. A priest, draped in white robes, stood before the gathering. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We must remember who we are. If Mohenjo-Daro fades, let our stories remain." The scribes wrote faster, pressing symbols into clay, hoping their words would outlive the city itself. The final night. That night, Anaya lay awake, listening to the distant howling of the wind. Somewhere in the city, a door creaked as it swung open. Was it another family leaving? She stepped outside and saw fires flickering in the darkness. Was it a ritual, a farewell, or something more ominous? In the distance, her father loaded a cart, packing what little they could carry. "Come, Anaya," he whispered. "It is time to go." She hesitated, looking back at the city that had been her home. The streets, the markets, the great bath, the seals carved with symbols no one would read again. Would Mohenjo-Daro be remembered, or would it fade into legend, its people lost to time? Epilogue. A civilization's echo. By the time the world rediscovered Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, the city had been long abandoned. Its streets, once full of life, were now ruins. Its language, once spoken by thousands, was forgotten. Yet its legacy lived on, in the cities of India and Pakistan, in the careful way people built their homes, in the symbols yet to be understood. And perhaps, somewhere in the winds that pass through the ruins, Anaya's footsteps still linger, whispering the story of a lost civilization. The Vanishing River. Anaya's feet ached as she followed the caravan north, away from Mohenjo-Daro. Her father led the way, their cart heavy with pots, grain, and the few belongings they could carry. Behind them, other families walked in silence, their faces weary. They were not the only ones leaving. Along the road, more travelers joined them, merchants, farmers, and priests, all searching for water. For generations, the Indus and Sarasvati rivers had given life to their lands, allowing cities to flourish. But now, the waters were changing. The Sarasvati, once wide and strong, had begun to dry up. The wells of Mohenjo-Daro had turned shallow. "Why is the river leaving us?" Anaya asked as they camped beneath a lonely tree. Her father gazed at the sky, his face shadowed by firelight. "Rivers have their own paths, child. When they change, we must follow." But as the days stretched into weeks, it became clear that the Sarasvati was not just shifting, it was disappearing. The forgotten river, Years later, when the Indus cities were nothing more than ruins, people spoke of a lost river, one that had once nourished an entire civilization. Some called it a myth. Others believed it still existed, buried beneath sand and time. Centuries passed and the land changed. New people came, bringing new languages, new gods. The memory of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and the great river that once flowed beside them faded into legend. Yet, deep beneath the soil, the river's ancient path remained, a silent witness to the rise and fall of the Indus Valley Civilization. And somewhere, in the shifting sands, the echoes of Anaya's footsteps still lingered, following the river that had vanished into history. The riders from the north, the wind carried the sound of distant hooves. Anaya had never seen men like these before, tall with golden brown hair and piercing eyes, their bodies clad in animal skins and woven cloth. They rode swift horses, unlike the slow carts her people had used. Their language was strange, filled with deep, rhythmic sounds that felt like chants. She watched from behind her father as the newcomers approached their camp. Were they traders? Warriors? Gods? No one knew. The leader of the horsemen dismounted, his gaze sweeping over them. His name was Varuna. He spoke in a tongue unfamiliar to Anaya, yet something about his words felt old, like they belonged to the land itself. Her father, cautious but curious, offered them food. The strangers accepted, their hands rough from long travels. "Who are they?" Anaya whispered. "They call themselves the Arya," her father murmured. "They come from lands beyond the mountains." A new dawn. The Aryans did not come with swords drawn. At first, they were wanderers, pastoralists searching for fertile land. They followed the rivers, their herds grazing on the open plains. But as time passed, they stayed. They built fire altars, raising their voices to the sky in hymns. They worshipped new gods, Indra, Agni, Varuna, gods of storms and fire. They spoke of the Rig Veda, verses passed down through song, carrying the wisdom of their ancestors. The people of the Indus cities, what remained of them, listened. Some feared these newcomers. Others joined them, blending their ways. The old world of Anaya was fading. The cities of brick and order were disappearing. In their place, a new world was being born. One of sacred fire, powerful gods, and a language that would one day become Sanskrit. Anaya watched the Aryans ride into the horizon. She did not know that, in time, their stories would shape the land forever.